This video is going to walk through the process of creating a time card tracker in Microsoft Excel. Along the way, we'll understand better how dates and times work in Excel and some useful things you can do with them. Let's start by typing our first date. I'm going to do January 1st, 2020. Now when I type in this number, you notice that Excel immediately changes it a little bit. Now it's aligned on the right and it looks a little bit different. And later, if I come in here, I can actually change the format, and so dates can show on all different sorts of ways. I can do it long, I can do it short, I can show with time, I can do it with days, all sorts of different options are available to me in how I want dates to be displayed. If you open up this file on a different computer, you might also notice that it changes. It'll adjust for date and time zones, as well as for countries in the EU that show it as day, month, year instead of month, day, year. So how does this happen? When I type a date into Excel, it'll automatically take a look at it, and if it looks like a date, convert it into a date. Internally, Excel stores all dates as simple numbers. I can verify this by hitting a different format on my cell. You can see that this date that I thought was actually a date of January 1st, 2020 is actually nothing more than a number, 43,831. I can type in a number like 43,832, 43,833, and I can format any of these as simply short dates. And now I have January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd. I can even convert number 1 into a date. When I do this, I find out when the universe began according to Microsoft Excel, which is January 1st, 1900. When I type in a date before this, like say January 1st, 1899, you'll see that Excel doesn't parse it out to the right because it's not actually a number. This is just plain old text. This is useful because I can type in a single date and then treat it like a number when I make a sequence. Let's go ahead and add 1 to the existing date. When I do that, you can see it creates a sequence that I can then copy down. And now I have a sequence of dates ready to go. Let's go ahead and do some times. I'm going to start by typing in 6 a.m. as my start time and 6 p.m. as my end time. Now again, these look like they're values, like text values, but actually internally Excel looks at them as simply numbers. If I change it, you can see that these are being stored internally as fractions of a day. So 6 a.m. is a quarter of a day, and 6 p.m. is 3/4 of a day. Similarly, if I type in the number 0.5, and then I change the format back into a time, you'll see that it comes out to noon. I can use this to do some basic math. Let's go ahead and format all of these as basic times. If I just look at the start time as a percentage of a day, at first Excel thinks that I want to use a time, and so it's going to format it as a date value. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back into a number, and then do the same thing with the end time. This is just so you can visualize what's happening here. I have the 1/4 of a day and 3/4 of a day. Now I'm going to do some math. I'm going to take my end time and subtract my start time. Now when I do this, you can think it's pretty obvious. I'm going to get with 0.5. But I get the same thing if I do 6 p.m. and subtract 6 a.m. because those are underneath the hood are just 1/4 of a day and 3/4 of a day. Now Excel thinks that I still really want a time, so I have to tell it to go back to a fraction. And now I have the fraction of a day. Now, often when I calculate time differences, I like to look at it in hours rather than as percentages of a day. Well, since there are 24 hours in a day, all I have to do is multiply by 24. Now I have the number of hours. The key thing for these columns over here, though, is that these cannot be formatted as times. If I format them as a time, I get some very strange results. I need to look at them as a straight up simple number. But now that I have the formulas, I can go ahead and delete these two in the middle here if I don't want to see them anymore. But just for the sake of instruction, I'll leave them in there for right now. Let's type in some other values. Let's do 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 5 p.m., 10 p.m., 5 a.m., and 12 p.m. Now with all of these values here, you can see that I automatically have conversions happening when I type them into Excel. I copy the formulas down, and now I can see in column D and E what these values are as percentages of a day. So 5 p.m. is 0.71 through a day, and 10 p.m. is 0.92 through a day. I then calculate the difference, and then multiply it by 24 to get the number of hours. And again, I can delete these two columns in the middle here and still be okay. Now I can do my sum at the end, and I have now my log of how many hours I worked on my project by giving the start time and end time. Now there are some other wrinkles you can do with dates and times. For example, I might have a date and time combined rather than just a date or just a time. So what does that look like? Well, imagine I type in 1/1/2020, 6 a.m. Excel looks at this and knows that it's a date and time together. So what does that look like? Well, underneath the hood, it's the same as a date, which gives me a number, and a time, which is going to give me a fractional component. When I want to format this, I can just simply choose what style I want, and I can show either the date by itself, or I can show the time by itself, or I can show the combination of the two. So these are all the basic options I have for looking at dates and times in Excel. There's a range of other functions that are also a little bit useful too. Let's talk about how to pull out a piece of a date or time. Once I have it, it's useful to occasionally be able to ask what's the year or what's the month. Let's do that with a couple of functions on the side. First, we have day. Day returns the day of the month, either 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 31. I'm going to give it a one value, which is the date. Month is very similar, and so is year. The key for all of these, though, is to recognize that these are no longer dates. If I format them like a date, you'll see they go back to that 1900 because it's counting the number of days since the beginning of the universe according to Excel. But I want to view it as a normal comma format or possibly a general format, since that makes more sense with the year. Hour and minute are very similar. And they pull out, again, a regular value, not a sequential or serial date. Now, the last thing you probably want to do is figure out how to create a date. So if I have day, month, and year, how do I turn it back into this whole serial date thing? I do that with a function called date. I'm going to give it year, month, and day, and then it creates a true Excel date value. And I can verify by clicking on it and changing the format to be back to currency or comma number. And then I can see I have, again, the serial date being put together. And as I change this, you'll notice I change the day, that it now updates to add 1 or add 2 or add 3. Other useful functions you might find are network days. Network days tells us the difference in working days between one date and another. So for example, I want to know the number of days between the 11th and the 1st. I can see there's 8 days. And notice the number is negative because I gave the bigger date first. If I want the other way around, I can do the start date and the end date. This was a brief overview of how dates and times work in Microsoft Excel. Hopefully it was useful and gives you a couple more tricks in your toolbox.